Hello everyone, and welcome to the Manobi Phygital Agriculture webinar. I'm Ted George, founder and chief narrative officer of Kleos Advisory, and I will be chairing the webinar today. Before I start with housekeeping and the agenda, I'd like to hand over to Daniel Anna-Rose, CEO of Manobi Africa, to give the words of welcome.
Hello everybody, I'm very pleased to see how many people are joining this webinar. Apparently we have a good audience. It's our pleasure. It's the first time that we are going to talk about phygital agriculture, and we hope to have a very interesting discussion with you, introducing this concept. Our company is working in this concept, on this idea of transforming agriculture, bringing African agriculture to the food sovereignty of this continent, using this phygital agriculture that we will be pleased to discuss with you. So a warm welcome to all of you, and we have 1 hour and 30 minutes to spend together, and we hope that it will be interesting for all of you. Thank you, George.
Thank you very much, Daniel, much appreciated. And so, to the agenda for today. Today, we are exploring the potential for the next generation of agri-tech to transform Africa's agricultural sector, phygital agriculture. Phygital brings together two worlds, the bumpy, confusing reality of the physical world with the seamless and flexible digital world in the cloud. For too many years, efforts to transform Africa's agricultural sector have floundered, despite an abundance of money, many new tech solutions, and the genuine willingness of all parties involved. What is needed is a new paradigm to transform this picture. And today, we will dissect exactly what is phygital agriculture and how it can change the game when it comes to managing risk in Africa's agricultural value chain and, critically, getting financing where it's needed, namely food production. So let's start with a short presentation on the challenge of financing Africa's, just to explain what we will have in the agenda. First, we will have a short presentation, which I will give on the challenge of financing Africa's agricultural sector. This will be followed by a fireside chat between Daniel Anna-Rose and Dr. Fadel Ndiame, Deputy President of AGRA. They will discuss how they are building a phygital agriculture ecosystem along the whole value chain. We will then have two case studies demonstrating how the phygital ecosystem works in practice. The first is on Manobi's Accelerant platform by Pierre Sibiri Traoré, Director of Research and Development at Manobi. The second is on the Regional Rice Value Chain Program. This will be given by Ugfali Badji, Senior Agribusiness Specialist at the Islamic Development Bank. We will finish off with an expert panel discussion bringing together the different actors in the phygital ecosystem, bankers, development institutions, insurers, and investors, to explore how we can work together to make phygital a reality. So to start off, there are major challenges when it comes to financing the agricultural sector, and these are nothing new to us. But it is a cause of great frustration to many of us who've worked in Africa's agricultural sector for years, that this transformation we've been waiting for so many years simply hasn't occurred. So what exactly is the problem? Well, let's look at a typical agri-value chain. This is a cotton value chain from a report by BMA. You can see that there are many different players involved getting the cotton ultimately to turn into clothing that we wear. We have the farmer at the start receiving inputs, seed, fertilizers, producing the raw cotton. That goes to the cotton producer. Of course, that might be a cooperative or a producer organization. They give it to the ginner who gins the cotton. They get the offtake from that. They then give that to a trader, trading house in the middle. The trading house might ship it. It might send it to a spinner or a weaver and eventually sells to a retailer, and that eventually goes to a consumer. And you can see at the bottom, there is a bank involved as well. Multiple payments are involved, many exchanges of documentation, and a huge amount of risk and a huge amount of trust that there needs to be for this system to operate properly. An ideal commodity value chain looks a bit like this. At the bottom, we have the banks and other actors providing financing for inputs. Farmers produce the raw commodities. These go on to the processors and the manufacturers who put them through the asset conversion cycle and turn them into goods. And ultimately, they go to the retailers and exporters and to the consumers. But the reality is very different. And the truth is that financing this value chain is very poorly coordinated, and the lion's share of the resources end up at the end. I think these three charts really demonstrate just how serious the problem is for Africa's agricultural sector. If you look at the one on the left there, the World Bank estimates around 55% of Africa's workforce works in the agricultural sector, but the sector itself gets less than 1% of bank lending. That's the pie chart in the middle. You can see there's a huge mismatch here. And seen from the perspective of the smallholder, the shortfall is enormous. According to the IFC, the total amount of debt financing available to smallholder farmers in the developing world is $9 billion. That's less than 3% of their financing demand. So why is it that financing is so poorly pushed into the agricultural sector, particularly where it's needed? Well, it really comes down to the balance between risk and available finance. Let's take a typical value chain here, which goes in one direction, let's say for the production of maize and meal in Southern Africa. We have the farmers at the beginning of the chain, they harvest the maize, they process it basically. It then goes into the middle of the chain. It might go to a grinder or a miller. It passes through warehouses, traders, might be a warehouse in a country of origin, and then a warehouse in the consuming country. And at the end of it, you finally have your revenue, the end of the value chain. As we pass through this value chain, there are numerous risks. At the beginning, we have country risk, of course. You could have problems, instability in a country, or maybe natural disasters which disrupt production. You have crop risk, which is, let's say, it might be a weather event, it could be disease or pests. And of course, producer risk. Is the farmer actually going to produce the crop? This in some ways is the same as performance risk, if you like. As we go to the middle of the chain, we have quality risk. Are people properly seeing that the maize is properly stored? Is there infestation? Is there damage? Too much humidity? Logistics risk, is it possible to get from A to B? And of course, warehousing risk. Huge amounts of fraud occur in warehouses as well. Is it being properly managed and looked after the product? And then at the end of the value chain, you of course have credit risk. Are you going to be repaid at the end? It means that there are a huge amount of risks in the value chain, and they effectively diminish as you go through the chain. And as you get to the end of it, they are practically almost zero. This means that conversely, the amount of financing available goes in the opposite direction. So this means if you're at the left side of the value chain, you're a farmer at the beginning, probably you cannot get direct financing from banks. If you are somewhere between the middle of the value chain, let's say you are a processor, you might be able to get 20, 30% of the value of what you're processing because you're still a long way from the market. If you have, let's say, goods in a warehouse up country, maybe 50% because you still need to get them to the coast. Let's say if you've got graded and quality check bags in a bonded warehouse at a port, maybe 80%. And ultimately, if you have a lot which is on a ship and it's going to an international port, a bank may even finance you 100%, confident that any trader would be able to make the margin back on his sale. But what this means is the vast majority of financing is available at the end of the value chain. We've seen it with the big trading houses who get the billions of dollars of financing from banks. They trickle some of this back to the suppliers and the processors in the middle. But at the beginning of the value chain, it means that really almost nothing is available. There's self-financing, there's small amounts of money from development organizations, there's some funding, let's say, from cooperatives, but it is not nearly enough, and that is where it is really needed. The impact this has is appalling. And we can see this by the low use of inputs in Africa and the very low yields. First off, if you imagine the critically low use of fertilizers. According to the FAO, in 2019, Africa used around 7 million tons of fertilizer. That's only 6% of the amount used in Asia and around 13% of that used in the Americas. And this means that actually crop yields are among the lowest in the world in Africa. Southern Africa itself, you can see in the table on the left, it is the continent's breadbasket. Countries such as South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi often export their maize surplus around the region, and they have yields similar to Europe and Asia. But if we look at somewhere like West Africa, it has average yields of about 1.3 tons per hectare. That's only 1/4 of the yields in the Americas. So there's a very serious impact here that the lack of ability to finance creates in the sector. And of course, it means at the same time that it's not possible for farmers to produce more crops in order to get more financing. The impact that this has on food production is very serious, and we've seen Africa's food import dependency rising strongly in recent years. According to Intrasen, imports of staple foods, these are wheat, rice, and palm oil, have quadrupled over the past 20 years. They peaked at over $26 billion in 2011. They're currently around $23, $24 billion. Among the leading importers, we have countries like Cote d'Ivoire, $600 million of rice last year, Nigeria, $1.3 billion of wheat and $600 million of rice, and Kenya with over $500 million as well. So there's, and a lot of these numbers don't really tell the whole story. According to official statistics, something like $500 million worth of rice is imported into Benin every year, but it's not consumed by the population. Most of that rice is parboiled rice, which is actually destined for Nigeria, and most of it is smuggled across, which means there's a lot of lost revenue, and local suppliers are constantly undercut by illegal cheap imports. And the problem is that local production just cannot keep up with demand. We have a rising urban population. We generally have a rising population. The demand is rising and the food shortfall is there. We need to have new ways of ensuring we can have local production of food crops. And then the final point also is, how do we actually identify the farmers? One of the most absurd things about the value chain for agriculture in Africa is that very few people know who anyone is who is producing these crops. There are so many middlemen in there who deliberately keep the information from us about where these crops come from. So anyone who is buying a product in a Western market has no idea who the farmer is. And if the farmer is essentially invisible, how do you lend to the farmer? How do you support them? How do you take risk on them? It's essential to connect them in so we can support, whether it's a cotton farmer, a rice farmer, a tea farmer, they need to be visible. And to do that, you need to connect them digitally. All of these problems come together. The inability to get the finance to them, the inability to judge risk, and this terrible food import dependency. They're all linked. And what is needed is a new paradigm to shift that. And that is what Phygital Agriculture is. And that's what I'd like to get into in our Fireside chat. Yeah. From the presentation I just gave there, was there anything that really resounded with you when you look at the problems in the agricultural sector?
I would say the most important one is the very strange situation that you described about the volume of importation, which is made in Africa, compared to the law, which means, and this importation are financed by the commercial banks, the African commercial banks, compared to the low access to credit of smallholder farmers. So which means today it's much more easier to import foods than to produce locally. And the other point which resonates to me when I saw your figures is the fact that if you look at it carefully, for a portion of what Africa spends today to import food, we can easily finance the food sovereignty of the continent, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So the challenge today is really to understand why we are in such a situation where, and you try to put some answers on this point by showing how the perception of the risk is different along the chain depending to the position of the actor along the chain. But we have to understand exactly why today it is so easier for an importer to be funded, and so complicated, even impossible, for most of smallholder farmers to get access to credit.
Well, do you think that there's a system of perverse incentives here as well? Because I've certainly looked closely at rice import regime, for example, in Africa, and it is amazing how complex it is, how fragmented it is. But it seems that a lot of the rice traders who actually play by the rules, they're constantly being undercut by people who are smuggling the rice in or breaking the rules as well. So there seems to be a perverse system here, which is ultimately supporting imports of rice rather than supporting local production.
Yes, but the question is, the point is it a consequence of the fragmentation of the value chain, or is it a specific business inside this value chain, which explain that these people can enter into this value chain? Basically, the fragmentation is one point, but it is clear that from decades now, the appetite for the smallholder farmers as a potential market is extremely low. And it is important to know, I mean, for a bank, it's much more easier to understand who is the agribusiness, who is the wholesaler, who is the transporter. But when we are talking about who is a farmer, when we ask the question about who is a farmer and to what extent it could be a regular client of the bank, it's something which is much more today impossible to respond. So we have this challenge, you know, bringing these people who are not qualified, this very important category of actors. I'm talking about the smallholder farmers. How to qualify them as potential clients for banks inside these value chains, you know, and not thinking about only how they can be. And I would like to discuss it with my friend Fadel. But we exactly know that the problem is that the effort that we need to do in order to work with the farmers, to know the farmer, to know their assets, and to be able to estimate or qualify their capacity to play a role into a well-organized value chain is very, very weak. And we expected that digital technology can help us to do that, but we realize that, I mean, we are talking about it since years right now. So ourselves, we started 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 18 years ago, to be clear. We started in Senegal we launched a market information system because we saw that the market information is something, is exactly what the farmer information is, what the smallholder farmer is missing to be part of this big market. But finally, it's not that way. I mean, it's not by bringing segmented or fragmented solution inside this value chain. We have to look at the entire value chain. I used to make, when I'm talking about phygital agriculture, I used to make the analogy with a symphonic orchestra. Yeah. You know? So you have the value chain, you have the musicians, the actors are the musicians, and every cropping season they have to play a symphony.
Well, listen, if I could just say, Daniel, Fadel has now joined us. Sorry about that, Fadel. I'm really glad that you've joined us now. If you want to unmute, please, if you could just give me some of your thoughts.
I have to say that the initial framing you provided is quite a good starting point. I think we have an irony around, especially talking about rice, a commodity which has a big market given the size of the imports, but which is so fragmented that we cannot unlock value. And I think the overall challenge we have is how do you then build risk-sharing facility, just to go very quickly.
Yes.
So that all the players along the value chain see the opportunity of winning together. Now, in principle, the strongest segment of the chain, as you articulated, where you have high value, low risk, typically have the means to pull the rest of the chain. The challenge is to do it is very complicated. And this is why I like my friend Daniel's concept of orchestration. We suppose we really imply the idea of bringing harmony and making sure that you can build a win-win platform that enables us to unlock value for everybody. Now, the good news, and just to quickly is, and I think you highlighted very well, there is significant room for improvement around the yield and productivity. I think the big challenge is how do you, knowing the potential, organize the chain between public and private actors, because some segments are very high risk and low value to start with. You're talking about infrastructure, it's a public good. You're talking about extension, which is also a public good. For you to unlock value for the producers, you need some level of investment that will enable them to increase their productivity in a way that meet the requirement of the millers and the. So in French, there is a nice expression, is gisement croisé de valeur ajoutée. I mean, that Daniel understands very well. So the case for a collective investment around this is possible. What is missing is the platform for coordination. As you mentioned earlier, you require trust. Technology can enable that. Basically, you need to rebuild an ecosystem for value creation in which you have a win-win scenario. and we do have the pieces and element of the ingredient or what it takes. The general principle, Ted, to the point you're making is start with where value is. What are the consumers want? What do they want to buy? What are they paying for? Who in the chain understand those requirements of the consumer? Then can play a role of passing on not only the resources, but also the information and the standard for the group to be able to seize the opportunity. And I think this is at the heart of what Daniel called orchestration. And I think we can provide tangible illustration of how we should go about addressing this challenge. Over to you.
Thank you. Well, actually, Daniel, on this point, how is it that you can actually really pull together a well-balanced ecosystem? Because you talk about orchestration, but how do we balance out the different members? So just like an orchestra, you get the right kind of sounds being made and not a cacophony and people going in different directions or at counter purposes.
We have, first of all, let me come back on what Fadel and my friends just said. We have to look at all the segment of the chain because it's a chain, right? So it's important to, I would say, to respond to what every category of actor along the chain need to improve its core business performance and also is requiring to get in order to lubricate its transaction with the other actors along the chain. And this is particularly important for banks to discuss with smallholder farmers, right? So we have three components, which I would say define what we are calling Phygital Agriculture. One, we need the expertise of the value chain. There is no way to do that. So, and this expertise is there. I mean, it's like coming back to the analogy with the orchestra. I mean, the musician knows to play their instrument, right? The question, and if you're talking about the smallholder farmer, the question is, how can we know exactly his potential and how we can help him to reach this potential? That's the question. So, and so for every act, knowing that and the response to this question depends on the value chain you are going to work on. So knowing this is very important, having the expertise of the value chain you are going to work on. You cannot come from and say, okay, I am an expert of, let's say I'm an expert in health observation, and then suddenly I can understand everything about the rice value chain in Niger or rice value chain in Nigeria. It's not exactly the same. So knowing having this expertise is, for us, is the most important one. Two, second one, yes, we have the digital solution and we have to combine all these solutions, all this technology together to provide the best business solution, development solution to each category of actor along the chain. Whether it's a bank, it's a farmer, it's an insurance company, it's an input supplier, it's a transporter, it's an agri-processor. All these people, all these actors, if they want to be efficient into the chain and keep the quality which is expected and the volume that we expected for an increase of production we expect from the farmers, we need to provide them the business solution. And we need to help them to lubricate their transaction. So we need the digital solution. But we are in Africa, right? So we are in a continent where we don't have so much data to say, okay, we can understand what kind of progress we made compared to the next decade or something like that. So we need a robust, physically driven digital solution. We need a presence on the ground. And that's an opportunity that the Phygital opportunity, the Phygital Agriculture is opening, that using this digital technology combined with this expertise, we need to contextualize the use of this data. So we need a physical presence, a proximal presence, particularly when we are talking about smallholder farmers, to qualify every single data that we will generate using all this vast number of technologies that we can mobilize, whether it's self-observation, artificial intelligence, IoT, all these things. We are using this technology, combining this technology with a strong, robust presence on the ground, which is organized through a network of young people that we are training, we are coaching, we are helping them to become a service provider proximity of the smaller farmers. And that helps us to generate a lot of data, which is finally very interesting to provide business solution for banks, for instance.
Actually, can I just ask on this question to Fadel? I mean, how important is data to you? And how has perhaps the attitude changed towards data and the way it's used, particularly when it comes to financing agriculture?
Yes, this is a great question, Ted. I think data is the essence of the game, data. Because unless you have visibility on the flow of value, you can't make decisions. And that's true for everybody. Farmers need visibility, firstly, on their own tenure. I mean, is this my land? When it's going to rain? Where is the market? What will be the price? So you have a lot of unknown from a farmer's point of view to be able to optimize. But if we take rice in particular, it's a very specific commodity. In a sense, it's both a primary but also an industrial commodity, because the paddy is not eaten, you have to process it. So you need to have visibility on the full chain to enable all the players to optimize their role. And it's not, data is crucial, firstly, to know who am I dealing with. And from a banking point of view, you need to know the risk profile of your client. And I think we have a very good example with the ICT company. I mean, I'm sitting here in Nairobi. I think the most common mode of payment used by everybody is M-Pesa. Everything is used by M-Pesa. Now, even if initially you don't have a census data, over time you build a profile. They know what do you buy, when, by how much money, etc. If you combine those information, it starts giving you a footprint of the different players. Now, bring it back to what we were talking about here. Rice production is not homogeneous. And one of the things I want to say is, we have a very interesting problem, because the smallholder farmer produce probably 50 to 70% of what we eat, but they're not rich. And one of the reasons is firstly, they have structural challenges that I want to quickly talk to. They are small, undercapitalized, and scattered all over the place, which means the transaction cost of supporting smallholder farmer is huge. So the first challenge you need to bridge is, how do you bulk buy, bulk sell, to start addressing the transaction cost. The second, you need to have visibility on who is the farmer, what production system is operating, what are the requirements, what are the assets. From a banking point of view, nobody will give you money if they don't have any idea of your own purchasing power. So data is important for the banker, but it's also important for the farmer. Most of the millers are people like you and me who invest their money because they see the opportunity. But most of them operate at 30% of their capacity because they don't get the paddy. So everybody will win if we have predictable play by knowing what is the demand, what are the quality requirements, what are the standards. Therefore, who is involved, what are their assets, what are the gaps, where is the value. A banker is not a philanthropist, they are looking for return on investment. Sure. But the one thing I want to say is, if there were no risk, there were no investment. So the problem is not the risk, it's being able to see it, assess it, and evaluate it to make your decision. So absolutely. Data is the name of the game, if I can summarize.
No, absolutely. Otherwise, then really it is just a gamble. It's just a gamble, isn't it? You're putting the money in and hoping it would happen. Daniel, do you want to add any more words on data as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's crucial to get data. And the question is, and one of the questions, you need to have accurate data, which is another point, right? Because collecting data is quite easier, but having good data is something. And this is why combining these digital services, solutions, and a robust physical presence on the ground is very important. Because
listen, I'm sorry, I'm afraid we're almost out of time for our chat. I did manage to claw back a bit of time as well, but I just wonder if we could finish on this issue also of the impact of COVID, because obviously it's been very negative for many people, but it has really driven digitalization. Obviously, we're doing this event digitally rather than in person, as we'd like to. But I'd just be interested to know, do you think you could see it as a positive thing in terms of the post-COVID world, where we see that digitalization and innovations like Phygital could really get a boost from the current wave underway? Maybe Fada?
Yeah, I think that's, I can give you so many examples of how data and analytics enable, in Kenya, they have a concept of war room. Food security war room, because the first problem we have in COVID is understanding what is the magnitude of the problem. Where are the hunger spots? Where is the surplus production? Because one of the big challenge is any government has to make a decision to stop the spread of the disease, which means no mobility. The bigger challenge therefore becomes, how do people have access to input? How do they produce? And depending on the cropping season, the challenge was different. But to go very fast, data was crucial to be able to make evidence-based decision-making point of view from a policy point of view. For SME, we did a survey which showed that almost 37% of women-led SME had to shut their operation down because they can't basically get the back. You can't move. If you can't move, you can transact.
No.
Now, one of the great use of data and analytics is the creation of what they call food balance sheet. Mm-hmm. Knowing at a country or a family level, how much month can I survive with my current production? Where is the surplus? Where can I buy it? And the ability to import from neighboring countries. So synchronizing information across government is the essence of the game. So I think what COVID has revealed is how fragile our production and food system are, and the need for resilience means being able to have access to data. Digital extension is crucial, digital finance. So it's have created a whole new opportunities where you can bridge some of the transaction costs I was telling you earlier. You don't need to physically be there, but you can map it out and bring it together in a platform so that it enables us to be able to make decisions based on data and evidence. It's the essence of the game as we speak now.
That's great. Thank you very much, Fidel. And Daniel, do you have just 1 minute as well to give your own view on the potentially positive impact of COVID on digitalization?
The first one is that the COVID showed us that we cannot only expect to import food, and that our logistic of importation is very fragile, as well as the logistic of the entire value chain. So when it is about optimizing the distribution channel of inputs, or whether it is about optimizing the supply chain of agri-processors. So this is where we need this data to optimize all the logistic of these things. And that makes a lot of sense for many of us right now to consider that working at the proximity of a market, creating the proximity of a market, developing the local markets is something which is absolutely important, which requires that we involve smallholder farmers much more than it is there right now into these agricultural value chains.
That's great. Thank you very much, Daniel. I'm sorry we're out of time, but I'm very glad we still managed to have our fireside chat. So many thanks to my panelists, Daniel, and to Fidel. Thank you very much. And we will now move on to the showcase of Phygital Agriculture case studies. So please give me 1 moment while I just bring in the panelists. So I would like to bring in, I'd like to invite Pierre Sibiri Traoré, Director of Research and Development at Manobi, to give the first case study, which will be on Manobi's Accelerant platform.
Okay, very good. So Accelerant is one such example, and I guess the only one that I know of, that really is built on the concept of Phygital Agriculture. And what you see on your screen right now is a picture of some of our colleagues working in the field in Kiboko in Kenya, where they are trialing a set of IoT rain gauges that we want to use to help advise farmers on good agricultural practices, improved sowing dates, reducing basis risk for insurance, and also helping reduce the cost of agricultural credit through abated interest rates. So oops, I have to change my, okay, here we go. So I won't go back into this, oops, I've been too fast. All right, so I won't go back in much detail in what has already been touched. As you know, we always have the choice between importing and producing locally. And I think that's one of the quite interesting opportunities that COVID has given us, is that we realize that increasingly a precursor to food security should be food sovereignty. And that is, those numbers that you see on the screen are examples from an analysis we did of the rice value chain in Senegal, where we do see that there is really an opportunity to improve investment in the production of local rice of various qualities that is still going to yield a number of benefits and margins for a certain number of users. And we use a variety of digital tools to do that, but not only, as has been discussed. Digital alone is not always sufficient to make it. So one example, and that's already been explained by Daniel, is at a very simple biophysical level. We know that in low input systems, the variability in yield primarily depends on the variability in management, even before the soil types and the rainfall levels, if you will, and reason at a landscape level. And one of the big elements of management is fertilization rates. And that is not something you can easily measure by magic, I would say, out of a satellite or a UAV or other device. To really know about it, you have to have someone directly interact with the farmer and ask the question. So for even critical biophysical dimensions of being able to understand how a value chain operates, you still need very close proximal presence and interaction. So this really provides us the framework for a number of pillars. We have 6 pillars in Accelerant that contribute to this orchestration of value creation in the value chain. The first one I mentioned is the knowledge of actors, and I'll give a few examples of that. More generally, the knowledge of the market. You need to have expert knowledge, both at an agronomic level, at an economic level, of how a value chain operates in context. Value chains can be extremely different according to crops and geographies and proximity to different urban areas. They have different levels of structuration, integrity, etc. And this really requires a lot of local intelligence. Likewise, we need to provide business services, because if you want to make this thing sustainable, it's not only about collecting data and then disappearing. It's really about making the ecosystem of data a live engine, which is actually fueled by business. This involves a lot of capacitation effort, and we will talk a little bit about that. It also provides the opportunity to greatly improve our ability to monitor the impacts, the outcomes and impact of the introduction of digital tools and other services into the value chain. And finally, it needs to be supported by sustainable business models in order to be scalable. So if you look at, for example, an agricultural value chain, we will typically have those 2 dented wheels. The upper right one is the one that deals with the technologies, including earth observation, mobile, lean data management, AI, etc. And this one really aims to facilitate access to credit in the first place, protected by insurance, allowing better access to supplies, increasing productivity and production, and market integration. But this cannot be done alone unless you have a very strong human interface. And that's the lower left dented wheel, which is anchored on creating jobs essentially for youth in the rural sector, franchising them, helping them qualify producers, advising them, and transforming the whole value chain. So I'll give a few examples of how, by connecting producers with banks, insurers, etc., controlling exposure to risk and increasing productivity and quality of harvest, we help de-risk investment in the value chains. So the first tool that we're using is AirMap for ag investment risk mapping and profiling. And to show you a little bit of what that entails, I'm going to shift to our web platform. So I'm asking Ted to confirm that you can actually see my web page right now.
We can see it clearly.
Very good. So this is focused on Senegal. So I'm going to zoom live into the Senegal River Valley, where we know that most of the rice production of Senegal comes from. Each one of those little dots that you see is a farmer cooperative. It could be structured in various ways. And then as we zoom in, we do see the individual producers appear. So bear with my bandwidth, it will take a little bit of time to load. But as you go further down into the detail, you will see that we can monitor each individual productive plot related to background satellite imagery, and have a number of quantitative and qualitative information that give us information about the endowment levels of a particular household, the productive potential of a particular plot, which is a function of the soil type, for example, etc. And then you can use all that information. And we have really a fairly large set of data. I could give an example in Ghana, for example, where you would see this producer of soybean is identified, fully referenced in terms of the social context, the household budget, the need for financing, and the connection with different types of financial institutions, need for bridging loans, etc. This information can then be organized and aggregated and provided to different stakeholders. And one of them is typically the bank. And if you see my slide right now back on your screen, we can aggregate for a given cooperative here in Diawar in the Senegal River Valley, what a loan installment for the whole cooperative and for its individual members actually mean in terms of aggregated numbers. So the cost of agricultural insurance, agricultural advisory, the costs of providing water, et cetera, et cetera. Second component is what we call BRISC, for Business Risk Reduction Instrument, and support knowledge. So this one looks, whereas AirMap really looked at how do you qualify farmers for a particular level of loan prior to the start of the season, BRISC is really about monitoring how the season unfolds and certifying, in fact, the reality of agricultural activity on the individual plot. So the way this works is that, for example, if you look at rice again and look on the x-axis at the season from land offsetting to parcel flooding to crop monitoring to harvest, we will monitor through different means, EO, IoT, mobile, individual plots, and we will look inside those plots whether they have crossed a particular management threshold. For example, in the parcel flooding area, you will see that at the penultimate date, an individual plot is still red because it has not been flooded, obviously not reported flooded by the agent, not seen flooded by the satellite, and therefore it would be risky for a banker to actually provide a loan to that farmer because that farmer is obviously not ready, having not flooded the field, to sow it. So there's no point actually providing a loan to that farmer to buy seeds and fertilizer. Whereas maybe 5 days later in the system that we implement based on Sentinel-2 data from the Copernicus missions, we can see that the plot is now flooded, and therefore we could tell the banker who's privy to the system, well, for this plot, the farmer is ready to sow. So you may release one installment of credit. And what this allows us to do effectively is to completely disaggregate over time and space the provision of credit to individual smallholders, which is a very big liability when it's not possible, as you probably know. So I could give again a few examples of what that looks like in the real world by zooming on an individual field again in this Senegal River Valley, maybe looking at completed season for 2019 and looking at different fields that were monitored. And you can see that for different steps of management, from plowing to flooding to crop growth and harvesting, we can monitor through different AI methods and also field-based whether the farmer has respected a particular cropping agenda and calendar. So if we look at this gentleman, for example, we will see his individual plot, and we will look, for example, at what time the flooding was declared to have been done. You see that the agent collected the farmer as having flooded the field on 8th of July 2019, and we can cross-check that against satellite imagery, whereby we see here on a sorry, that was August, 1st of August, it's not yet flooded, but on the 11th of August, you start to see in near real time the water entering the field. So we can actually find different ways of certifying whether the activity as it is declared is indeed happening. And you can see how from both satellite on the top and the ground, we actually monitor how the crop is being progressing and the farmer implementing the management levels he's supposed to do. So I'm going to complete now with the third and last aspect, which is target, and that's the third component of our system. So just a second while it loads. Here we go. So target is really about what happens at the time of harvest. And here, in fact, you're going to see examples from the cocoa value chain where we can see here an individual analysis coming in from a farmer. And we can see how the harvest lot has gone through a whole set of validations, from the reception of the lot, waiting for the analysis of the harvest lot, the validation of the analysis, the inception of the transaction, its validation, and the payment to the farmer. This can be then aggregated at the level of a whole set of farmers or several cooperatives. We can monitor for a particular season here in 2018, how stocks have evolved in different warehouses that are part of the digital value chain. And we can finally have a total overview of what the outcome of that particular cropping season was, which is essential for example, a supply chain manager or even a banker to assess the performance of a particular investment. So this is done through also a very strong human component that we call Accelerant Academy. It involves several levels, not only people on the working on the ground as franchised, but also back office supervisors who curate the data, interact with the agents, provide supervision, and also people who work, as you saw before in this background picture, as AI developers. And we have a very striving collaboration with the African Institute of Mathematical Sciences, providing us many scholars every year to develop those automated methods. Finally, this is the supporting business model, if you will, for $800 per hectare of a loan given to an individual farmer. Much of it is going to go into inputs and seeds, but also into mechanization services. But a small fraction of it is going to cover the cost of the insurance premium. And even part of it can be earmarked for the development of our own R&D methods to still make the system more efficient and optimized. And this generates a benefit of about $2,000+ for that particular hectare of production, assuming that the farmer is able to increase by 60% his or her output. I'm going to finish by saying that we can use this to monitor social benefits, and we already have built in the systems ways to look, sorry, I actually skipped one part, but I'll show it maybe later. We can monitor how farmers individually are faring in terms of the socioeconomic impact. So you could look, for example, at the propensity of a farmer to have his children work on the field, in case, for example, the mother is involved in trade or agricultural production. And we know that in the case of mothers who are involved in trade, and we have this for the different countries where we work in, we do see the impact. If you see here, for example, that children involved in field activities or child labor or farm work is quite significant. But if we look at women who are involved in trade at the household level, then we can see to what effect this is going to affect the propensity of children working on the field. So I will conclude now. I hope I'm not over time. I've not really checked it. But saying that we are working and we're privileged to work with the Islamic Development Bank, ISDB, on the regional rice value chain program to implement this system. So it is now ongoing in Niger Republic, but it's planned to also be kicked off in the other countries. So that's 10 countries total, of which the 5 first, Niger, Guinea, Sierra Leone, the Gambia, and Senegal, are already running and will soon be joined by Mali, Burkina, Benin, Cameroon, and Cote d'Ivoire. So I guess I should probably stop at this point, Ted, to also acknowledge the different collaborators we have, both in the financial sector, in the development community, at the government level, like the Federal Ministry of Ag and Research and Rural Development in Nigeria, our friends from Swiss Re, Spacebell, CG, CCAF, Secresat, etc. I thank you for your attention, and I relinquish my hosting capabilities.
That's great. Thank you very much, Pierre. And the great thing is, of course, we're going to be having several of those companies who will actually be on the panel at the end. So I would like to welcome, if I could, to give the second case study, Ugfali Baji, Senior Agribusiness and Agro-Industry Specialist at the Islamic Development Bank. He will be talking about the Regional Rice Value Chain Program. So Ugfali, I'm going to hand over control to you. Hold just one.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Ted, and good evening to all of you, where you are in the world, morning, night. Special thanks to Dr. Fadel, Daniel, and Dr. C. Just share my screen if you don't mind. Okay. First of all, before just starting this small presentation, I just want to give you the background on how IDB is engaging with member countries on the path of food sovereignty, dealing with rice production. You know, this Regional Rice Value Chain Program is an IDB country regional program that was announced by His Excellency the IDB President in Tunis during this annual meeting. And the main objective of this program is to contribute to reducing, you know, high importation rate of rice and enhance economic growth through improved production. The program itself includes three main components. You know, we have the first component, raising rice production and productivity, strengthening the links to markets, policy and institutional support. An investment opportunity in the rice value chain can be classified into two dimensions. If we look at the production side, we will have the production-related opportunities, including processing-related opportunities, policy tools, and then we will come up with one question: what are the key policy in terms of laws, regulation, and standard that will ensure delivery of rice of certain quality? What are the role of the public, private sector to be put them into sufficiently role of public investment? What is the nature of the public investment that facilitate private investment? Does it change with the context? And now, let me just move to the next slide. If you look at this slide, the IDB Regional Rice Value Chain Program could be a powerful pathway toward alleviating poverty. With this specificity, innovation, vital initiative for beneficiary member country, strategic flagship because engaging a lot of technical partners, including Manobi, UNDP, Africa Rice, AGRA, Swiss Development Corporation, IFDC, etc. And it's a very, very significant investment as well. And it will have a very powerful mobilization dynamic and engine. Now, if you look at the rice production in Africa, I think I don't need to spend more time here because even Ted highlighted at the beginning, I will just pass and just ask two questions. If you look at in the trader perspective, one question we can ask is, what drives most of the major traders to deal with only imported rice? What are the drivers to make them consider handling the domestic rice produced? It means that we have a kind of paradigm between imported rice and local produced rice, quality versus quantity. And now, if you look at this regional initiative for the bank, Islamic Development Bank, we can easily say that this regional investment plan for accelerating rice self-sufficiency in IDB member countries will use a very innovative approach to the value chain. Because we are dealing with value chain since a long time, but this time being, we need a very well coordination mechanism, because we have a lack of well coordinated regional effort to deliver rice production technology in the similar agroecological zone, and help address related issues of extension, policy market, research development, and regulation hindering the widespread use of technologies. Now, if ISDB and its identified partners therefore seeks to refocus the effort of the CGR and its network with National Research Institute to build sustainable rice production program and investment program. Now, the value chain approach used by the bank will emphasis on how we're going to accelerate and sustain self-sufficiency in the rice for the 10 countries, how we're going to contribute to food sovereignty in the 10 countries, how we're going to identify segment of the regional rice value chain for investment, and how we're going to identify additional investment along the rice value chain. And then we will enhance involvement of private sector, job creation, and regional market share in a global rice trade. Now, if we say that the value chain approach need to be efficiently leveraged to unlock the massive production potential in sub-Saharan Africa, we need to be in line with all these aspects, among them the use of value chain approach, push-pull approach, systemic constraint, better of farm, and then facilitation, build flexibility and credible evaluation to ensure evidence-based learning. So if you look at this scheme, I don't want to explain too much because it's already done by Ted at the early beginning, but we have a very complex system, integrated different approach using several activities, among them, primary activities and additional activities, supporting activities, etc., etc. What to do in this case? And then if we remember by benchmarking how the Asian countries managed to deliver large amount of rice in uniform quality in terms of varieties, processing performance, and so on, to be the major domestic, to the domestic cities as well for export. Now, in terms of regional synergies, what are practical and implementable means of leveraging, regional synergy in the rice value chain? How to get there? If we say that we're going to use key technical partner, it means that the bank is moving into connectivity, responsiveness, and partnership. It means that we need to put in place a policy. We need to identify institutional and public-private investment drivers of successful rice value chain development in Asian countries. We need to do a benchmark. And so we need to explore opportunities for leverage in Africa, maybe, and focus on intervention toward rice sovereignty. One of the key for IDB is the orchestration of the value chain. I don't need to move thoroughly on this because already explained by Dr. Sibiri. We are using now for our program Accelerant with Manobi. Manobi will support ISDB to implement a sustainable structuration of local value chain and for the creation of social and economic value for all stakeholders involved in the program. And then we'll just face with dealing with phygital agriculture. Physical and digital agriculture will support the full-scale utilization of digital technology just to empower farmers by providing security, first of all. Security in terms of quality, security in terms of quantity, and security in terms of income generating activities. And then to accelerate the local production by connecting all small or large scale producer and other value chain stakeholder to investor, financial institution to achieve food sovereignty. Now, our mandate as the Multilateral Development Bank is just to support member countries. But we need to find our way in a very, very transformative way, very efficient way and innovative way. How are we going to get there? What are the best governance and management models of agribusiness partnership we're going to use to achieve our mandate? What are the critical legal and regulatory measures that should be put in place by governments of member countries to enhance foreign direct investment partnership? Now, how could smart and complementary investment help restructure the value chain? This includes both infrastructure and soft, meaning ICT technology and platform. What are the appropriate tools that can be deployed to de-risk value chain investment? This should be taken into account the additional challenges associated with the COVID pandemic nowadays, including potential directional policy trends, ensuring supply chains are open and not disrupted. Thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ogfali. Much appreciated indeed. We're now going to move back on to our final session of the webinar, an expert panel discussion with key representatives from the Phygital Agriculture ecosystem. So give me one moment while I bring them in. So I'd like to introduce my panelists if I could. We're welcoming back Fadel Ndiame from Agra. We also have Daniel Anderez as well from Manobi from earlier on. I would also like to welcome Dr. Stefan Kunz, Business and Invest Component Manager at GIZ Senegal. We have Mario Wilhelm, Head of Middle East and Africa Public Sector Solutions at Swiss Re. And we have Landi Ahuansu, Investment Director at IFU Africa. Thank you very much for joining us. And could I remind panelists, attendees, please do submit questions because we've only had a few questions so far, but I would like to pick up some at the end of the panel. So let's get right to it. We have discussed the problem. We have explored the Phygital solution and how it can work. Now, what do we have to do to make the Phygital agriculture system a reality? We have representatives from all over the ecosystem on the panel. How can we work together to achieve this? So I wonder maybe if I could start with you actually, Fadel, to get the perspective of development banks and bilateral institutions. What do you think you need to do in order to be able to invest public money in the Phygital agriculture ecosystem?
Thank you very much, Ted. Thank you for a very rich discussion. Just to go very quickly, I think we see three major challenges that needs to be overcome. The first one is access to finance, as it's very clear. I think Traore's presentation was very clear. Second, we need to deal with the challenge with competition with imported rice, but that's today's market reality. Thirdly, you need to avail access to quality seed and mechanization. So those are the challenges that stand in front of us for us to capture the opportunities. Therefore, from that analysis, the opportunity we see is finding the proper financial system. It's basically a financial engineering play. I hope we'll get there because of the nature of the risk and how different players may have to play a different role. I like very much the contribution from Brother Badji, who shows the leadership of the Islamic Development Bank in really attacking the rice challenge. So finance is a big deal. Secondly, we need to find effective way of upgrading mechanization services for farmers and millers. And I hope we'll get back to that because part of the value is to be able to manage quality. Mm-hmm. And you need to win the fragmentation of having several types of varieties, different meals, different standards. It's very difficult to meet the competitiveness challenge. Thirdly, we need to have access to high quality seed that match what consumer want to see. And you need policy, import regulation. I like very much what Badji said. It's not realistic, given the magnitude of import, to think that we can have an import substitution in the next 2-3 years. I think we need to be very smart on how to work with the importers to create an incentive for them to also help commercialize the local production when it is possible. So this is what we see as the challenges and the opportunities. And I think the people around this table can have significant contribution to that. Over, thanks.
That's great. Thank you very much, Fadel. Well, I wonder if I can move on to Stefan. GIZ is interested in innovation and has been working closely with Manobi to develop this Phygital agriculture system. How can this Phygital approach transform your involvement with Africa's agricultural sector? Stefan, you're on mute.
Well, sorry, I was a little bit too slow. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for all the inspiring messages I got today. I mean, we are not only interested in working with Manobi, we are totally convinced about the approach. I mean, I myself, I'm coming from Asia, working there more than 20 years in the private sector. I mean, all the buzzwords have been said. And I mean, I want to focus particularly, if we talk about transformation, on food security in Africa and also the market, because that is also something we have to distinguish. I think it's very much important that this is, to me, this is an African solution I was always dreaming about. And therefore, I mean, we have to consider that as a holistic approach. I mean, I'm really grateful that even the Islamic Bank is participating in this access, because without access to finance, I mean, what can we do? I consider our organization, you know, it's something like a midway for this kind of approach, which has been elaborated by Daniel and his followers. Because what is really necessary that we have to, I mean, particularly in this time, which is dominated by climate change and Corona and all these issues, but this is a big chance for Africa to go in its own way to find own solution. That is the reason why we are very much interested to work in this complexity of partners, because I guess this can be really a structural change for a lot of other commodities. I mean, I'm personally working with Manobi actually in the value chain of cotton, and where we talked only about agricultural experts and farmers and so on, but we also have to integrate the processing part, which might be another linkage. I mean, Dr. Fadeli already talked about mills. This is the same story. We have to consistently, we have to define who has which function in the value chain or supply chain. And I think what is very much necessary with regard to other systems which they propose, particularly in Europe, and this is what Manobi does in a very good way, we have to adapt the system to the value chain. And I mean, it's very much necessary also, particularly if you work with farmers or processors, but even with bankers. First of all, I mean, you can only attract them if you can maintain a personal relationship, which is particularly based on a technocratical development cooperation, always a big issue. I mean, working for a German organization. At the same time, I mean, this is an academic discussion, but we have to break it down to a certain level where people really understand what is the value of data. And I think that is another issue, that we have to make this kind of data architecture very clear to all the stakeholders, because at the end of the day, particularly for a bank, as we said, it's a risk management tool. Yeah, and we have to provide data, and we have to assure, as Daniel said, we have to assure the quality of data. I mean, for that purpose, you have to be present in the field. Yeah, I mean, I'm doing that as a field worker, I mean, almost my whole life. And this is always why we need to have all this holistic solution, but we have to make it very comprehensive. And this is starting, as you said, I mean, it's starting with the farmers. And then, I mean, if we talk about banks, this has already an abstract level. I just came from a conference where we just talked with a bank to give a processor of cotton, I mean, a spinning facility here in Senegal, give him a loan. And we came with this idea, and I explained him what we have in mind coming up. We call it traceability application. I mean, I don't care if we call it just phygital agriculture or whatever kind of system. But this to me, I mean, fighting for that issues for a long time, this is the solution. And I can only wish that we find a common sense and promote it, what we actually do now with GIZ. I mean, this is not in competition to other solutions, because it's a holistic approach. And honestly, I haven't seen something like that in the last 30 years.
That's great. Well, that's very good to hear indeed. I mean, it really shows that we are breaking new ground with this kind of technology and the combination of the technology and on the ground. I wonder if I could move to you now, Mario, to get the insurer's perspective. Generally speaking, Africa's agricultural sector is very underinsured. Most farmers are not even aware that they can insure against the risk of crop failure or climate change. And so what I'd like to know is, how do you see the potential for Phygital Agriculture to de-risk the agricultural value chain and maybe to help you develop insurance products directly for it?
Thank you very much for this question.
You're a bit quiet, Mario. Do you want to lean a bit closer?
Oh, I might have to move closer to the microphone.
If you just hold the mic closer, thank you.
Better? Okay, thank you very much for this question. I'm really enjoying this conversation, right? A lot of points have already been made. Similar to Fadel, I would like to start actually with the three biggest challenges we are seeing when it comes to insurance topic. They all start with the A, so it's the three A's. It's the awareness, access, and affordability. So what does it mean? Awareness, as you just said, that most farmers, I mean, most people also on the African continent are actually not aware of what insurance can actually do, right? What's the value of insurance? And some of them had, negative experience with insurance products. So we as an industry have to change that, because insurance has a very important role to play, right? So we, in the end, help the farmer to de-risk, right? And we know farmers are very risk averse. So de-risking will help the farmer to take on more risk, to invest more, right? And then in the long term also to participate from the growth in their business. So that's a big challenge, right? Awareness, and we have not cracked that yet. Second one is access, access to insurance. So we have now experience of around 10 years with insurance for smallholder farmers in Africa. I have to say, looking back, most of these projects have actually failed, right? So we have not achieved to reach the farmers at scale. And I'm convinced, right, we cannot do that in a one-to-one approach, right? So we have to find aggregators, right? We have to bundle insurance with other products and services that reach the farmers. That could be loans, right? Agricultural loans, could be agriculture inputs, seed and fertilizer. And there are also different concepts tested on the continent. Could also come with government programs. We also see that in some of the countries, but key point here is we need to be able to provide access at scale, right? And the question is, what kind of aggregators can we target? My last point is affordability, because the insurance value chain is simply too expensive, right? The unit cost of production insurance is geared towards the middle and upper class. And that means the fixed costs are quite high, and that make it almost non-affordable for the smallholder farmers. And that's exactly where technology comes in, right, on all these three challenges. I know awareness, I think with technology, we have the chance to reach many farmers at once, right? Not this one-to-one interaction. We can disseminate information quite broadly. Access, the same, right? We can use the mobile channel. M-Pesa was mentioned before in Kenya, which is also used, to facilitate payments, either premium payments or claims payouts. So we can leverage that also to access the farmer in a very efficient way. And the last point is affordability, right? If we also start digitizing the insurance value chain, we bring down this unit cost of production, in the end, make insurance more affordable to the farmers. And then instantly it also becomes a business case for the insurance industry, right? They start to get interested in agriculture insurance for smallholder farmers because they also see the commercial value in that.
That's
I
great.
stop here also in light of time.
Indeed. No, that's great. Well,
thanks.
I would like to come back to that issue about scaling. I think it's a very good question, but I'd like to move to Landry now. Thank you for being patient, Landry. It's time to talk to the investors. Look, we've heard the whole story now. And the buck stops and starts with the investors. Do you see an opportunity for investment in Phygital Agriculture? And how can investors support banks so that they can finance local production? I'd also be interested to get your view, Landry, on prospects for investing in things like the Guarantee Fund. Oh, sorry, you're on mute, Landry. Can you unmute, Landry?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Please go.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Ted. And I'm very happy to participate in this conversation. So the short answer to your first question, is there an interest in the Phygital Agriculture? Definitely yes. And in link with that, and I'm really happy to be here today because, as you said, I mean, how can investors support this type of initiative. There are a lot that has been said in the discussion, and I fully buy into all the contribution, all the reflections that were made, because as an investor, and I think it has been said, what we do, we sell, we buy risk. And in order to buy risk, you need at some point to be able to measure the risk. So when you have a business, will it be in agriculture and any other sector, it's it's a lot of risk. It's sort of a composition of risk. So you measure it, you de-risk up to what you can de-risk, and you price the remaining risk. So the good thing with digital agriculture is at the end of the day, it's helping us in doing both, measuring the risk, because in agriculture, the main challenge we have as an investor and also banks have is we don't have access to data. And if you don't have access to data, how do you want to price the risk? See? And I think this point has been touched upon by Mario, which is an insurer, and same, if you don't have data, you cannot price the risk and price an insurance. Otherwise, if you do it, then it's gonna be just so expensive at the end of the day, and the system, it won't flow in the system. So I'm very happy that this initiative is in place, and as I was saying, it's also helped in, I was about to, my second point, yeah. So the risk with the data and also with the technology, it creates a sort of network, because that's the main challenge we have in Africa. Apart from my role at IFU, I used to work for the West African Development Bank, investing a lot in the agribusiness space and especially in agriculture. And and it has been said one more time, we have a lot of farmers, we have a lot of potentials, but we don't have a network. So when you take a country like Ghana, where I'm based, and a country like Ivory Coast, in the cocoa space, they are the world's top producers. But until recently, they were sort of dealing with the sector individually. But from the minute they decided to join the first, the energy together, then there's a synergy that was created from there. And I'm happy that with the digital and with the small farmers, then we're gonna create a network. We can control the sourcing, the storage facilities, all the logistics, which gonna create, generate an added value and make the whole system viable. Now, are we interested in financing, let's say, for example, the guarantee fund in that regard? Of course, yes. IFU, together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, we have already done something similar with the SMEs. So in order to help the banks in issuing loans to SMEs, because it was the same problematic at some point, because the bank were not really familiar with the SME risk, because as you know, in this part of the world, most of them are like family-owned businesses. So we have created this guarantee fund, which was issuing guarantee to the bank that were willing to finance the SMEs. So this was sort of a leverage and a sort of an insurance to the banks to deliver a guarantee to SMEs. So I think the same system can be replicated in the agriculture, so that there is a fund which helps at some point the banks to sort of de-risk some transactions, and then serve as an incentive so that they can issue more financing, because at the end of the day, we are all doing this for sustainable development in our countries. And I don't think we can achieve that goal without focusing on agriculture, especially in this part of the world. I'll pause here, and if there's any question or comment, I'll be happy to.
That's great. No, thank you very much, Landry. Well, it's interesting also what you're saying about the guarantee fund in there and the opportunity for it. I wonder, Daniel, if I could just quickly bring you in. Having heard everything that we have now from the different panelists as well, what is it actually that you need? Are you encouraged by what you hear about the different viewpoints and about how we can work together?
Definitively. I think we are together. We are all agree on something. We cannot continue looking at separately every segment of the value chain. That's something which is important. We have to look at it together. The credit, the insurance, the access to inputs, the access to seeds, the capacity to transform, the logistic, the extension services, everything is part of the value chain that we want to build. That's the first point. And all the observation, all the panelists mentioned that. One. Two, I like what Landry said, because definitively the way we present this ecosystem that we want to build together is sufficiently de-risked to allow bank supported by the proper financial instrument, that the one you mentioned, the guarantee fund, which can go to the bank, to finance this chain. If we can bring together the required information that needs to be provided in order for every player to be comfortable in investing into this chain. And I think this is the opportunity we have to work with, particularly in this condition of COVID. We have around the table public sector, private sector, the development organization, banks, insurers, investors together right now. I'm happy to that is my conclusion about this discussion. I'm happy to see that we are on the same page. And it seems that we are convinced that we can build the food sovereignty of this country by bringing transparency, bringing honorability into this value chain. So for me, it's a very important point.
That's great. Thank you very much, Daniel. And I think it's interesting because you're talking about bringing everything to the value chain. And this really gets actually to one of the other nubs of the problem that we have, and also the strength of the solution, which is about scalability. How do we scale? Because what we don't want is islands of excellence. There's no point about having one area which is very nice and everything's running efficiently, and half a mile away they're burning down forest and they're doing whatever because there is no control at all. It has to be a scalable solution, and also one which can cross borders. So I wonder if I could just start with you, Mario. We don't have much time, but if you could just give me a few comments on how you see the importance of scalability, and particularly how do we achieve scalability?
Yeah, I already mentioned, right, the need to work with aggregators. Another observation is, we have to move away from pilots. Too often we have engaged in pilot projects, and the goal of the pilot was to prove the concept, right? But in not many cases, the long-term perspective came through. So I would actually advise, if you think about implementing a project, think big, right? How can you reach 1 million farmers? And then see the pilot project really as the test case, where you can prove a concept, you can prove the technology to later scale it on. But to start a pilot on its own, without this long-term perspective, I would really advise to stop that.
No, thanks. That's very good. In fact, I was always told that whenever trying to propose a project, I should never call it a pilot. I should call it phase 1. Even if you don't have a phase 2, but it should always be going somewhere. I wonder, Fadel, could you give your views on that one as well? How do we scale?
Yeah, no scale. I think impact at scale is the name of the game. And I think the short answer, I'm glad that Landru and others refer to it, is cooperation. It's really bringing everybody together, everybody bringing their strength toward a common goal. Scale requires public investment to de-risk. Scale requires policies that are consistent, that are evidence-based, that use data. But also it's require having a delivery platform that can reach. And I like, Mario, your 3A. I have 2 other A, but I will tell you in another time. You need to build it on analytics. You need then to be able to articulate a vision of success for all. And this is where you're talking about the network. Then you need to act. And I think this is where what Daniel and team are bringing is amazing, because it gives you not only a global perspective, but you also know what is localized. One of the challenges I have for Daniel and team is, how do we create value for the smallholder farmer? I can see how you create value for Landru. I can see how you can create value for Mario. But how do you create value for the smallholder farmer? By giving them visibility around the market, the resources, the technology, the return, and the risk they are taking, because they are probably the biggest investor. So, and maybe to end, and because we have the right public, I think building is really about financial architecture. How do we de-risk? How do you blend? How do you bring different resources so that typically the problem is not a problem of resources. My boss used to say, the challenge is not lack of resource, lack of order. How do you make sure that you can build a platform that use public money for certain things, use commercial money for other things, use investment money for other things? Against that infrastructure, I think the banks and private operators will do their job, but having full visibility. At the end of the day, you need trust. It's very awkward to end with that, but it's trust and predictability.
Absolutely. And I think trust is the basis of all banking and all business relationships, ultimately. Stefan, I saw you nodding in approval there as well. Do you have some thoughts as well on this question of scalability?
Well, I only can confirm what all the other gentlemen have said. At the end of the day, we have to consider, sorry.
It always happens at the moment that you're on, doesn't it?
Sorry, yeah. I think we just have to be aware that we should invest all our competencies. And I mean, this cannot, as you said, Mario, I mean, this can be not something which is fragmented or project. I mean, I would consider that as an initiative. Movement might sound a little bit too politically, but on the other hand side, I mean, to me, working in this field, I mean, for a long time, this is a solution, and we have done similar things in Asia. But the good thing is now, I mean, we talked about the boost of IT. And this is probably the only beauty of Corona, that people have realized what IT can do if we come up with a transparent architecture of data and provide access to data which are relevant. I guess a bank like the Swiss bank might relate to other data than a processor we have like in the cotton industry, but this is something which can be easily, I think, which can be easily elaborated. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much. And Landry, your views on scalability? I can imagine when it comes to investment, you're in multiple different countries. Scalability must be one of the things you're looking for to actually get the return.
Yes, definitely. And I can join my voice to everything that has been said so far on scalability. And I think this one has been discussed at some point during the conversation here, where at some point we are looking at the economies of scales and the transaction cost. See, so when we have a small sample and we try to apply, deploy something on this, a small sample, then we have a transaction cost associated to that. So scaling this initiative and bringing it to another level will also encourage the investors to look at the transaction. Because if you look, especially in this part of the world, in the agribusiness space, I mean, we sort of put a general sentence saying there's not much financing to the agricultural space, but that's not totally true. When you have large farms, because I've worked a lot in Ivory Coast, for example, I mean, they are like large corporations that have like thousands of hectares. They have access to the financing, but the small farm holders, they are the ones that don't have access to this financing because they come as a unit. So definitely, I agree there's something that should be done there. A lot of proposition, good suggestion has been put on the table. And at the end, it's for us to put them all together and to work together to sort of reach a concrete result at the end of the day, I would say.
That's great. Thank you very much, Landry. Well, I'm afraid we're almost out of time, but there is time for one more question, and I'd like to ask it to all of you. And the real question here really is, where do you see the real opportunity? Where is the real area that each of you can move on this opportunity for phygital agriculture in the coming year, as hopefully we get into the post-COVID world? So maybe if I could start with you, Fadel, where do you see as the biggest opportunity next year for making a real step forward with the phygital world?
I think just walking the talk, leveraging if I look at this panel, I think we have such a huge opportunity to start coming together to make it happen. It's a win-win game, but it requires clarity on the vision, what is success, what are the underlying values, fairness, commitment, inclusiveness, sustainability, etc., and what are the concrete modalities of working together and becoming accountable. For me, that's the opportunity I see. I think it's possible now, and it takes leadership, and I want to thank Daniel and the team for an amazing leadership. My organization is totally committed. I'm personally totally committed to that because I think that's the opportunity of our generation. And great to see my friend Daniel again. So We have not retired yet. We have not retired. We are retiring. But over to you. Thank you.
Building a fresh empire is what you are, and none too late as well. Maybe Stefan, if I could have your idea, where do you think there's the most opportunity for you next year with Phygital?
I think the opportunity relies into the contact to the industry. I mean, we talked about the market in the first beginning, and that's what we are actually doing. I just have sent Daniel an SMS that we got already in contact with huge European buyers for textile. I mean, who have to comply with sustainability standards. And again, I just repeat myself, it needs to have a kind of well, it needs to have a sustainable approach and a holistic approach, which is really market and business driven. Yeah, and I also have to say, out of my experience, I'm a little bit doubtful with all the smallholder issues, because this cannot be the future for the next 15 to 20 years, and that means we have to create also other jobs. And I mean, it's always the same, and that's what we're discussing here with the farmers in the south of Senegal for cotton. At the same time, we have to upscale it, but if we get more volume with regard to cotton, I mean, we also can increase the processing part. And this is, I guess, this is the big challenge for all of us.
Absolutely. And I think it comes down to this thing of having value addition industries that actually add value and that don't chew up capital. And Landry as well, where do you see the real opportunity next year in Phygital?
Yeah, and in connection to what Stefan has just said, I mean, there's a huge opportunity because as an investor, for example, we are looking a lot in the manufacturing industry. And most of the time, the challenge that we are facing is, let's say, for example, there's no, I mean, the sourcing part of the raw material is a real challenge. So when you have an agribusiness firm, they come with a very strong project on the paper. But then when you look at how they're going to get the raw material, then it becomes a challenge. Or sometimes they do have it, but they are obliged. I mean, we are in Africa, we have the soil, we have the good weather, but they are obliged to import. It's an additional cost and a lot of additional things that come into the balance at the end of the day. So definitely there's a huge opportunity in there for next year if we can level up so those small farmers so that they can scale up and work in a network, then we are sort of solving two problems at the same time. The agricultural side and the manufacturing side, knowing that farmers are going to help the industry, and in reverse, the industry is going to help somehow the farmers. And it will sort of, in a perfect world, answer one of the questions that were asked, which was to identify how we create value from those, for those small farm holders. See, if we have a strong industrial sector, then at some points we create value, and it will just be a matter of monitoring how this value is going to the farmers. As now, we still need to create that value before making sure it's going to the farmer. So that's the opportunity I see for next year, and I'm looking forward.
Absolutely, well, it's about synergy, isn't it, and cooperation. And Mary, maybe just a last word as well on where you see the opportunity in terms of insurance.
You know, Fadel actually prompted me to add another A to my toolbox, right, which is the analytics. And if we discuss fragmented value chains, right, integrating different stakeholders, taking a systemic approach, I think we cannot afford to have a digitally fragmented value chain in the sense of that we have data silos, right, that we have different IT systems around. So the big question would be how to bring that together in a digital world. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah, beautiful. I also actually have updated my alphabet as well. We always used to talk, or the last few years, about the ABCD of trade finance, which was, of course, ADM, Bunge, Cargill, and Louis Dreyfus. Today, of course, it is AI, blockchain, cloud, and data, big data. So things are changing very much. I wonder, Daniel, would you like to just have a last word on your hopes for next year and what you hope to achieve with Manobi and Accelerant?
So no, I think I can add something about after what Mario, Stefan, and Landry and Fadel said. And unfortunately, our colleague, Dr. Cissé of IDB was waiting to join us. He cannot join us because of some connection issues. But we already have, with the cotton, 2 million hectares of rice right now. It's our pilot, just for you, Mario, our assessment project. Okay, 2 million hectares is 20% of the cropping, rice cropping area over the continent. It's a big market. I think we can focus our efforts on this value chain. You know, cotton is a program that we are running with digitizing, but also this rice value chain, and demonstrate at scale that we can, for these particular crops, create the food sovereignty that we are dreaming of since a long time right now. That's the opportunity. All the people around the table together, we can do it. And I would like to continue this discussion with you, and with enlarging the network, Mario, as you mentioned it. Continue with you, Stefan. We are not only working on cotton, but also we are, thanks to with the support of GSA, we are promoting in Africa Rice, we are promoting the development of the proximal network of agents on the ground with the Accelerant Academy. And with you, Landry, how can we know since the financial crisis of 2008, we know that the commercial banks have to follow some regulations, some rules, particularly the Basel II and III rules are applied right now. And I think that with this concept of guarantee fund that we just discussed briefly, that's something we have to develop together and see how we can address the need of this value chain and continue developing all the solutions that will help us to create trustability, traceability, transparency, and honorability into this value chain for the sustainable food sovereignty of the continent.
That's great. Thank you very much, Daniel. I think that beautifully wrapped it up. So I'm sorry, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. So I would like to thank my wonderful panelists today, Fadel, Danielle, Stefan, Mario, and Landry. I'm just going to now do the final word to wrap up. So I will just drop you out back into attendees. So thank you very much, everyone, today for watching. I hope today has helped demonstrate for everyone that there is a new solution out there to transform Africa's agricultural sector, and that solution is Phygital. But it is only by building a broad ecosystem, bringing in the farmers, the traders, logistics, bankers, development finance institutions, insurers, and investors, that we will actually create an effective system and finally address that key constraint on developing agriculture in Africa. How can we help local banks directly finance local food production? That is how we will get to food sovereignty and also link together the value chain in agriculture. If you are unable to see all of this webinar, or if you would like to watch parts of it again, there will be an edited version as a podcast, which will be coming out in January. And in the meantime, look out for updates from Manobi on next year's program of webinars and podcasts, which will be about Phygital agriculture. If you would like to get in touch with Manobi Africa to find out more about anything that has been discussed today, the contact details of the team will be on the screen shortly. So thank you very much for watching.